Those that have been to many of these summits before will know this used to be an hour-long session, actually, and we used to sit and go and dissect the reports into great detail. So you'll be delighted to hear that we're taking a slightly different approach, post-lunch slump, and we're just going to have a bit of a quick-fire session today. So we're going to do 15 minutes, and we're going to pick up the reports, and we're just going to look at some of the key themes that we picked up from the report this year. And it is the 5th annual report that we've done. And I should just give a little bit of background around how we do the report for those that are new to this particular report and why we do the report, I suppose. And then I will turn the attention to Antoine Hobesch, who is going to give us some of the context and the background about why we chose those themes, whether we think we've got those themes right, and give us a little bit of expert industry insight as well. I just want to also give a mention to the people who are involved in preparing this report every single year and just explain how we do it. So in about 3 months' time from here, we will start this process all over again. And the good thing is that we're now starting to collect a reasonable amount of data after 5 years. And the team will come together and we'll think what worked last year, what didn't work this year. And we'll start to think about what those trends that we might want to analyse going into the following year will be all about. And excitingly, this year we had a bigger response to the survey than we've ever had before. So I also like to just take a moment just to say thank you to anybody in the room and anybody right across the MENA region actually who took the time to fill out the survey. I'm sure it's something that some of our return clients get involved in every single year, but frankly, without having that data, without you taking the time to get involved and actually give us those answers, we don't have a report to write. So thank you ever so much. Thank you for making it the most interactive report that we've had in the last few years. I'd also like to try and pronounce Gillian's surname, which I'm told is fake knee. But Gillian, if you could just give us a quick wave in the audience today. So there's hard copies of this report which have been made available. I think there's about 200 of these out and around today, and we'll obviously be circulating electronic copies for those with a little bit more of an ethical carbon footprint. But Gillian writes this report every year. She is the person who collates all of this data, and she actually spends an incredible amount of time and effort putting this report together. And so although we've given it a fresh approach, and it's now the first time you've seen the Refinitiv name on it, I think it's really important for me to explain that the people behind this report for the last 5 years are the very same people. And Gillian and I have been working on this project together year on year. So we've got a real consistency in terms of what we're building, but there's a massive amount of work that goes into Gillian doing that. And then on top of that, we of course bring in the experts from industry to give us that. So Phil Cotter, our Global Managing Director of our risk business, took some time to think about how does this fit in with some of the other reports that we do around the world. And if you're not familiar with those, I'd strongly encourage some people to take a look at some of the things that we're doing in the annual cost of compliance report that we've released. We're going to soon be releasing another one around sort of innovation and fintech. And we try to interlink some of those themes with what's going on, obviously globally, but then to give it a bit of a regional feel. And this year, Antoine took it a step further and said, how can we be a bit more granular? Where can we go in terms of thinking? It's nice to think of as the MENA region, but how do I start to assess what's happened in the GCC versus what's going on in North Africa? How do I look at what's happening in the onshore versus the offshore? And that's some of the themes that we're trying to look at. What's different between a large organisation and a smaller organisation? So I'm glad I didn't read that script because I went way off it. And we will probably jump in. But the one thing I will say is, who are the people that answer this? So predominantly, our typical respondent is in a risk function, surprisingly enough, and they're in anti-money laundering, compliance, and financial crime. 17% of those actually sit in an audit function, and over a third of them actually hold a managerial responsibility or a role within their organisation. So that gives you a bit of a feeling about who they are. And if you get into the technicalities and you look at the back end of the report, you can actually see the data broken down to see what type of organisations, what countries are we looking at. And so the key 5 themes that we're going to pick up this year, which we chose, were technology is back in the spotlight. Secondly is personal liability is a growing regulatory risk. The third is that we're starting to see more ABC regulation, which is an interesting one because it was an area we spotlighted in previous years that we were surprised to not see such strong results. The fourth is to think about ambitious countries that are leading from the front. And then the fifth is the fact that we think that smaller banks are on track in terms of these, getting up to pace in terms of their regulatory development from an infrastructure point of view. So no further ado. Last year we were all a little bit surprised that we thought that there was a bit of a flattening in terms of what we were seeing for the results from our respondents for investment in technology. But this year we seem to have shifted back towards seeing a large-scale investment in technology from the respondents. So that flattening, by the way, was consistent with what we saw in our other reports around the world, including the cost of compliance reports. What's your thoughts about why we may have had that hiccup last year, and then potentially why we're now starting to see that investment starting to pick up again in this year's report?
Thanks, David. Just to quickly mention that a survey is responded by individuals, so I'd like to look at them as consumers. So much of a consumer report. So when it comes to technology, we look at the behavior. Last year, for example, cost was one of the major indicators. And so there was a price sensitivity issue of last year. And it's still available this year. However, it has changed, and the number one concern is to fulfill regulatory requirements. So since RegTech is on the table this year a lot more, individuals have seen what regulators are looking for, and they said, no, we should start looking back into technology. That's one. Number two, in the report, we also found out that roughly 40% of individuals had experienced some sort of financial crime activity or fraudulent activity from their bank. So that also is an alarm for them to say, wait a second, there's a trend in increase of probabilities of risk in this area. That means we have to enhance our technology. And I believe last but not least, they were looking towards the leaders. A lot of banks were waiting to see what other banks were going to do. And even in the survey, we've noticed that a lot of people are, I believe, 29% were already using cloud computing and AI and machine learning. And that encouraged them as well to say, the industry is on track in technology, so let us follow their lead. So these are, I believe, the main indicators.
Fantastic. I think it'd be great if we can get up on the screen, actually, the infographic, which has been made available as well today and will be published. So those that don't want to read through our 50 pages of the report, definitely take a quick look at this to look at some of those stats. So the second one is around the question of personal liability, and I think that's a hot topic here, right? Because if we look back at the FATF reviews that have taken place, I think in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia, personal liability or actually just enforcement action were a couple of the areas that there was a little bit of criticism, kind of held up. But on the other hand, if you look across the world, it does seem like personal liability is an increasing trend. We're seeing more of it. Yeah, if you look at the statistics that we pulled out of the report, there are some questions about why potentially there is that lack of concern here, which is slightly out of kilter with what we're seeing elsewhere around the world. What's your thoughts on that? Because the positive side says we've got some very confident people here in their compliance systems and processes.
That's absolutely correct. Let's look at it in two ways. The pros are, if you look at individuals that are confident in their financial crime program, the results are incredibly encouraging. 70% of people are stating that they believe that financial compliance program is adequate or above adequate, with a 9% increase from the individuals that believe it is very reliable. So that also says if you have something that you believe is solid, you're not very much afraid of what's going to happen to your personal liability. Now, on the con side, it also has to do with awareness. The survey has also showed us that awareness is an impact on these things. And I cannot specifically say that we've heard a lot of people that were personally liable in early 2017, but by the end of the year with Huawei now and all these large cases that are coming up in the news, people are going to start thinking about it twice. So I personally think personal liability, I kind of understand why in the MENA countries is not there yet, but I foresee in the 2019 report, we're going to see different figures.
Okay, it's interesting. I'm sure if Brian was in this session now, he'd put his hand up and say the DFSA were very outspoken in their last outreach session to say that I think 6 of the last 8 enforcement actions they've been involved in did involve an element of personal liability as well. So perhaps it's a trend that's moving on. Again, with your help this year, we took a slightly different approach in terms of segmenting the data to think about what this means at a country level. And we came up with this theme around ambitious countries surge ahead. And I guess this is very much linked to what we're seeing from an economical position with regards to the fact that obviously there's a real drive towards getting that international investment. Countries like Saudi Arabia opening up sovereign wealth funds, etc. So, can you tell us a bit about what you think that theme is for this year's report?
Well, look, the good news is commonly we mostly think that countries from the GCCs are the ones that are leading the pack. This year, we've been pleasantly surprised. There's Egypt in the pot, there's Lebanon, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE are the ones that have put in the most envisioning of technology and investing into their financial crime programs, which is very encouraging. If I believe also in the running, there's Jordan in there. It is very encouraging for 3 reasons, because it shows how the unity of these countries are coming together in combating financial crime. Not only the ones that have experienced terror within their countries, also the ones that are trying to avoid it. So there's no real theme there other than we've successfully reached a place where awareness, cognition of what's going on around the world, and the ability to protect your financial stability in your financial sector is a major theme. So that is incredible from a UAB point of view.
Fantastic. And on to the final theme from this year's report, which is around smaller banks being on track. And I should openly say that this report isn't just open to banks. Of course, we take all sorts of different institutions, the NFPPs, etc. But the primary responses we still get are from regional banks and obviously some of the larger global banks operating in the region. Why have we come up with the theme small banks are on track with regards to upgrading their technology?
Unfortunately, in the MENA region, we have to segregate the financial sector, because the larger banks, to me, they're international banks right away. I don't make the difference between a international bank and a MENA bank. A large bank behaves, acts, and invests like any other international bank, whether European, American, Asian, or any other country. However, just like other countries as well, smaller banks have to be considered differently. Because of the panel that we said prior to this one, they were having problems or issues with the added regulations. And is within the responsibilities of governments and regulators to try to see how these smaller banks are coping. Mm-hmm. Because the smaller banks also help and ignite financial inclusion in many Arab countries where financial inclusion is minimal. So the importance on smaller banks in the MENA region is higher than anywhere else. So starting from that, we have to see how they behave. They're an important part of the market. They are an incredibly big sector, fulfilling a great need for the society. And pleasantly, the responses were that they are considering, a bit to a lesser extent, obviously, technological advancements, enhancing their financial crime programs. And this also shows in certain places, that's why we divided them also by countries, where certain smaller banks have a lag and they need a push. And that's very important. I congratulate Refinitiv on the survey of this year, because I believe it's inclusive and truly reflects what is happening in the market.
So I think that's one thing perhaps we don't shout loudly enough about, is some of the role that some of the larger organisations play in terms of the education. And I know some of the big banks in this region here do huge amounts of outreach to their own correspondents, and you and I, in the work that we're doing with the MENA Financial Crime and Compliance Group, listen to the big banks around the region talking about how they want to work to get engaged in that project to actually help out the smaller banks. And perhaps you can just mention quickly, it's outside of this, but a good example of what's going to take place with the workshop with the Wolfsburg Group in April in Jordan as well.
Just very quickly, everybody knows that Wolfsburg issued a questionnaire, and the MENA FCCG, we came down and made a roundtable to try to see, is this questionnaire applicable and can it be easily filled? We noticed some issues with it. We kept in contact with the Wolfsburg Group, and then once they took into consideration some of our comments, we invited them to come to a session to train us on the questionnaire, train the trainer type of program in order for larger banks in each of their country to start promoting the proper fillings for them to have a reference. Because I don't know many people are going to pick up the phone and call a member of the Wolfsburg Group, try to ask him a question on the questionnaire, but you're a lot more likely to call your friend in a larger institution within your country and say, look, how can we do this? And we're also planning, hopefully, God willing, to create multiple seminars via the UAB, via Refinitiv, via MENA FCCG, that will be able to help individuals ask these questions, create awareness, help them fill the questionnaire. So we're at par globally.
Fantastic. So just when it looked like we were finishing on time, I took us off topic and made sure we went over time. But
it's quite all right.
Fantastic. I think the report is obviously available for everyone. Do grab any of the people in the room today who've been involved in that report. Antoine will be here. Gillian has come all the way from Cape Town to be with us as well for this event. So if you see Gillian, she's got a wonderful amount of knowledge in terms of what we do with this report every year. And of course, Phil, who can talk to you about the wider context of all of the reports we do. We love your feedback, and I'll give the final word to you because you've got your finger up.
Yes, just a minute. You know, I'm also a strategist, and it's very important to know how decisions are made. Did you know that, by fact, every single high-ranking executive makes 40% large decisions? 40% of them say they make a large decision at least once a month. However, what are these decisions based on? Every single statistic states that it's done on gut feeling, instincts. And that, ladies and gentlemen, in a world that we're in, the more data we have, the more instinct we're going to start making as decisions. It's completely wrong. In the past 10 years, Harvard has spoken about the errors and the risks of making gut instincts. And now MIT, 10 years later, has also a report on the errors of making gut instincts. I highly recommend, and most people, you know, in university, just very quickly, when you want to make a report, the first thing that we think about is collecting data in order to make decisions. The financial sector at the UAB, one of my jobs is to use information from surveys such as these that have so many experts on board. They're making your life easier. Even in the boardroom, when you walk in, you say, look, this is why we split up small and larger banks. This is what larger banks are doing, guys. This is what smaller banks are doing. This is where we're at. This is an incredible factor. Unfortunately, I see these surveys not being properly utilized by C-level executives, but rather by mid-level executives. And that is completely erroneous. You cannot do that. So please make the best of it, especially for the amount of work that was done and effort that was put into it. Thank you.